Hello everyone, this is Mekkah, and today I'm back here again with another Pokemon trading card game online video. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I did an analysis on freezing Genesects, and I did one on Weavile a long time ago. And because of that, some people do ask me occasionally, hey Mekkah, why don't you just do more Pokemon content? Because I love watching that. And the truth is, people know me for Fire Emblem, but I do like playing Pokemon sometimes. But it doesn't get as many views because most people subscribe to me for Fire Emblem. But I don't know, I still think they're fun to make occasionally, so I had some time, so I decided to make one. This is one of my, if not my favorite deck in the Legacy format, so I'd love to explain it to you guys how it works, and I'm going to play a game with it. I'll go over my deck list, and I'll explain the cards and what they do in case you're not familiar with them. So here's Eelektrik, the Pokemon this card is all based around. Its ability Dynamotor says once during your turn, before your attack, you may attach a Lightning Energy card from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. Now, if you're not familiar with the Pokemon trading card game, you only get to attach one energy card from your hand to one of your Pokemon every turn. So being able to accelerate, especially from the discard pile where your lost energy goes, is incredible. It lets you attach like 2 or 3 extra energy cards to your Pokemon on top of what you already get from your hand. So you can accelerate attackers that no other deck can really quickly and get one-hit KOs and outrate almost everyone. And as you can see, this deck has a whole array of different kind of attackers that you can use with Eelektrik. And we're going to go over each and every one of them, because I think the versatility and the amount of power that Eelektrik has is really the edge it has over other decks. So we'll finish up with Eelektrik here real quick. 90 HP and a very bad attack for 3 energy. It does like 50 damage. That's not very good, so you really want those other attackers. It also has a 2 retreat cost, which is pretty bad. That's why you got to play like cards like Floatstone to get it out of there when needed. Dynamo is what Eelektrik evolves from. It only has 40 HP and has an attack called Thunder Wave that lets you do 10 damage, and if you flip heads, they're paralyzed. I think this is the best Dynamo. There is one that has 30 HP but 3 retreat. That means if you start with it, it's easier to get it to the bench. The drawback, of course, is that it dies to a combination of Furbank City Gym and Hypnotoxic Laser. So if you start with one and you go second and they have those 2 cards, you just lose straight up. And it also dies more easily to things like Landorus' Hammerhead and Plasma Curum's Frost Spear. So that's why I prefer playing 40 HP Dynamo, and I think this is the best 40 HP Dynamo. Now onto the other cards. I guess we'll go over the attackers first, and then we'll get into the support Pokemon. This is the main attacker, probably the best all-around one, Rayquaza EX, 170 HP. It's bigger than most Pokemon, but that's because it is an EX, which means it gives up 2 prizes when knocked out instead of 1. So you want to be a little bit careful. The attack the deck is based around is Dragon Burst for a fire and a lightning. You do 60 damage times the number of energy you discard. So the way it works is the attack says discard all your fire energy or all your basic lightning energy. So it has to be a basic energy. You can't use like Rainbow or anything. You attach them or you discard them, and then the attack does 60 damage times the number of energy cards you discarded. So for example, if your Rayquaza has a fire and 3 lightning, you can discard the 3 lightning. You do 3 times 60 is 180 damage, which knocks out any other EX pretty much. So that's why this deck is so strong. Is you can accelerate this Rayquaza, just attach the fire from hand, use Dynamo to attach lightning energy, and just get 1-hit knockouts like straight up. And very few Pokemon are able to keep this stream up turn after turn so easily with so few cards from hand needed. So that makes this deck very resilient and very powerful when set up, even if it falls behind a bit. And if your opponent cannot knock out Rayquaza EX in 1 hit, but it is knocking them out in 1 hit, especially if they're playing EXs, there's no way they're going to catch up to you. So you can afford to fall behind quite a bit with this deck, which is what I like. Celestial Roar, not a very good attack. It's very risky. Discard the top 3 cards of your deck, and if any of those cards are energy cards, you can attach them to Rayquaza. Now the problem here is, of course, you're often going to discard non-energy cards. As you can see here, I play only 11 energy. So you're probably going to discard at least 2 and sometimes even 3 cards that aren't energy. And those can be precious cards like Supporters, Junk Arms, your Scoop Up Cyclone, Super Rod, good attackers. That's all really bad. So very risky. I usually, even if I have a Rayquaza EX active with with energy early on, I don't even use Celestial Roar. I much prefer passing. So just focus on Dragon Burst is my advice basically. Now next up we got the Baby Rayquaza, also known as Shredder Rayquaza. I'm just going to call it Rayquaza here because that's what it says on the card. Don't confuse it with Rayquaza EX. 120 HP and 2 interesting attacks. The first one, Dragon Pulse, does 40 damage for a single energy. Discards the top 2 cards of your deck. Again, pretty risky to just discard cards blindly, but with Dragon Pulse it's usually worth it. if you're getting a KO with it. So for example, Pokemon with 40 HP or less, such as Swablu and Tynamo, they just straight up go down in one hit. There's also Gibble. Gibble and Swablu are both part of the Garchomp deck. Gibble has 60 HP, but it's weak to Dragons, so it also dies in one hit. That's usually worth it. Even if you discard like a Junk Arm and a supporter, it's pretty much worth it to always just use Dragon Pulse to get a KO and get an early prize lead. And then Shred is also pretty good. For Fire, Lightning, and a Colorless, you do 90 damage. It's not affected by any effects on the defending Pokemon. This usually doesn't come up. It's mostly important because it's coming from a Pokemon that isn't an EX like Rayquaza EX. There's a lot of cards that Rayquaza EX doesn't trade well against, either because they are non-EXs and they're designed to take on EXs. So just the Plasma Weavile from the last analysis I did. It's meant to like give up one prize and then take two. Whereas the Rayquaza, it only gives up one prize when it's KO'd, so it's less precious. It can also KO other Rayquaza EXs in the mirror match, which is also huge because that means to KO their EX and take two prizes, you only have to give up one prize in return. So the trade goes in your favor. And if you're playing this Rayquaza and they're not, you're pretty much in a, well, they're not guaranteed to win by any means, but you can make comebacks and get ahead on prizes. It kills Sigilyph as well, which is immune to Rayquaza's Dragon Burst because it's immune to anything by EXs thanks to Safeguard. So pretty good Pokemon in specific matchups. Pretty much anything that is frail, has low HP, can be killed by Shred, and that's very nice. And we got Victini here, only 70 HP, so even more frail than the Rayquaza. V-Create for Fire and a Colorless does 100, but that's like really cheap and really powerful, but if you have 4 or fewer bench Pokemon, this attack does nothing. This Pokemon is mostly meant for the Freezing Genesect matchup. What you do is you get this out along with a couple of Electrics and you try to one-hit KO it with V-Create, because both Freezing and Genesect are weak to Fire, which means you do double damage to them. So 100 turns into 200 and you want to KO them, and there's not a whole lot they can do to get that trait back in their favor. Because even if they can kill Victini, odds are you'll be able to one-hit KO them back with either a Rayquaza EX, or you can even use Super Rod to put Victini back into your deck and then just bench it again. You only have to play a level ball to find it, put a new Fire on it and get another one-hit KO, and that's just disgusting to deal with. The way they do deal with it is by playing the Ditto from Triumphant with Diddlebolic. It does the same as the Sudowoodo, currently legal in Standard. It limits your opponent to 4 benched Pokemon, and that means V-Create just doesn't work. It becomes a liability, it just cannot attack ever. And that's the reason I put in this card, Victini EX, with Intensifying Burn. The second attack does for a Fire and 2 Colorless. You did 50, but if they're Pokemon EX, you do 50 more, so that's 100. And then Freezing Genesect, again, they're weak to Fire, so you're doing 200, so you still get a 1-hit KO. Of course, Victini EX is a little more clunky. It requires 3 energy instead of 2. It gives out 2 prizes instead of 1, but it only has like 110 HP, so very fragile for a Pokemon EX. Very easy to give up prizes with it. But against Freezing Genesect, they still kind of want to KO it without some weird kind of boost like Laser, but they generally don't play that. It is possible that they like chip it on the bench with Megalo Cannon for 20 and then KO it for 100. That's kind of annoying, but it can still, you know, let you want to KO them in return, so it's pretty good. Other matchups try not to use it because it's so fragile. It gives out 2 prizes. You generally don't want to do that, but there are some slow games where you're having a hard time accelerating energy with Electric, either because you're having trouble getting Tynamos or finding Electrics or discarding energy. In that case, Turbo Energy can be a nice emergency option to just search your deck for 2 basic energy cards, either Lightning or Fire, whatever you need. Attach them to a bench Rayquaza EX or something and just power yourself up that way for a quick Dragon Burst. That is an option. Doesn't happen often, but it does sometimes. Next attacker we're going to take a look at is Raikou EX. Another thing that gives out 2 prizes. This thing is used mostly for Volt Bolt, the second attack, for 2 Lightning and a Colorless. You discard all Lightning energy attached to this Pokemon, so again, would be very costly for any deck. Electric is very good at synergizing with Pokemon, and in this case with Raikou, to just get it powered up turn after turn if needed. So you discard all energy, and then it does 100 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So you can target their active, or you can target their bench. Now when you target their bench, you're able to snipe things that have yet to evolve, or things like Jirachi EX, which only have 90 HP, but give up 2 prizes. And of course, it also you can also target their active, mostly useful if they're weak to lightning, such as Empoleon. So this is a pretty good flexible attacker if they don't play Mr. Mime. If they do play Mr. Mime, it's pretty bad, because then you can only hit their active for 100, which isn't too great. You have much better options for that. But if they don't play down Mr. Mime, or they don't play it, or they don't have it, or you want to hit their active for weakness, then it's pretty good. Thunderfang can be used to buy time sometimes, but generally I don't bother using it. Just like the Tynamo, it's more of a desperation option. but it can win games sometimes. It shouldn't, but it does sometimes. Let's see what else we got here. We got Zekrom. Again, a Pokemon that's made to exploit lightning weakness because of its lightning type. Even though Electric accelerates lightning energy, we don't play that many lightning Pokemon, so it's nice to have some of these in case you're up against something weak to lightning. Volt Strike is its main attack for 2 lightning, and it calls you doing 120 and 40 to itself. So after attacking, Zekrom is pretty frail and generally goes down in 1 hit. But it can be an okay starter to take some hits, because if they do attack it, it's probably not going to die in 1 hit. And then you have the option of using Outrage to hit him back for more damage than I dealt, because it does 20 damage plus 10 more for each damage counter on this Pokemon. It does have a 2 retreat, so not the greatest starter. You kind of need a float stone to retreat it sometimes, but it's alright to buy some time and occasionally get an attacking. So that's the attackers we got. Rayquaza EX is the main attacker, but then in matchups where we want non-EX attackers, we got 3 different ones in Rayquaza, Victini, and Zekrom, and then we got some more tech attackers, I guess. Like Victini EX and Raikou EX, so very flexible depending on what matchup you're playing. That does mean that sometimes a lot of your Pokemon are going to be dead cards. You want to discard them rather than bench them. So it's good to be aware of when you need what Pokemon in certain matchups. We've also got some support Pokemon to work with. This is Smeargle. You're probably familiar with Smeargle if you've watched previous videos. Portraits lets you look at your opponent's hand if you activate it while Smeargle is active, because you can't use it while it's on the bench. So Smeargle's active, you say Portrait, you can get to look at their hand and then use one of their supporter cards as if it's yours. But you can still play your supporter that turn, so sometimes you have the opportunity to play multiple supporters in a turn. That lets you find things more easily. If you have a dead hand, but you got something like a Jewel Ball or a Level Ball, you can find Smeargle, retreat to it, and maybe your opponent has a support that you can use for you to actually be able to do stuff that turn. So it's a good way to get out of a dead hand. Again, the alternative is to use Jirachi EX, but Jirachi EX is a liability. After playing it, you can only use it once because it's got a come into play ability, where Smeargle can be used almost every time after a knockout. But you can also just put it active to buy time while preparing your bench and not worry about losing 2 prizes, unlike Jirachi. So pretty good Pokemon, not the most reliable because sometimes your opponent doesn't have a supporter, or they might have a Juniper and nothing else, and you're forced to use the Juniper and you might have to discard some resources, but I feel like it's worth the risk. Smeargle's pretty good, and I like to bench it late game in preparation of an N, so that if my opponent plays an N and I draw a bad hand, I can still use Portrait and maybe get out of it. So I like Smeargle a lot. Then we have Mr. Mime with Bench Barrier, prevent all damage done to your benched Pokemon by attacks. So this is great to defend against Pokemon like Raikou, who try to hit your bench. You don't want, in a mirror match for example, you don't want your opponent to be able to Volt Bolt all of your Electrics and run out your energy acceleration, so Mr. Mime protects you against that. There's a lot of other Pokemon in Legacy that like to hit your bench, Megalo Cannon from Genesect, Plasma Curum, all that kind of stuff. It's not as useful against Landorus because Landorus is usually paired with Garbodor, which shuts off Bench Barrier, but even in that matchup in the early game, it can be nice to use Mr. Mime to stop some bench damage, because Dynamo and Electric are very vulnerable to bench damage. Dynamo dies in 2 hits to any sniping attack, whereas Electric usually dies in 3 hits of 30 damage, so Mr. Mime can be very important against those. And we got Keldeo finally. You need to switch around a lot in this deck because Dynamotor only goes to the bench, you cannot accelerate your active. So oftentimes, for example, Rayquaza just attacked something, took a KO but discarded all of its energy in the process. And the next turn you might not be able to attack with that same Rayquaza. But if you bench Keldeo EX, you can use Russian to activate Keldeo EX. Then you can use Dynamotor to put energy back on your Rayquaza. And then you can retreat your Keldeo using something like a Float Stone. You can attack with the same Rayquaza again. So that's why Keldeo is in here, to help you switch around. It's also very useful if your Pokemon on the active spot is like put to sleep by Hypnotoxic Laser, because that way you can rush in and then retreat and get out of the status effects, because status effects go away when you go to the bench. So Keldeo EX can be a great lifesaver. Now we'll go over the supporters first before I go into the regular items. So I play 1 Colress, 2 N, 4 Professor Juniper, and 4 Professor Oak's New Theory, or actually 2 Professor Oak's New Theory. So Juniper is the main one. You just discard your hand and draw 7. This is useful to get lightning energy in the discard mostly, but it also is the card that draws the most cards most of the time at any point in the game, regardless of bench size or anything. So that's why Juniper is an easy 4-off. Then you got Oak's New Theory is just a supporter that's never bad. Sometimes it can be worse than other options, but it's never actually a bad card. You just shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 6 cards. Pretty generic and easy way to get more cards. and at the start of the game, it's the same effect for you, but it also shuffles your opponent's hand back in, and depending on the prize stance, it can also be disruptive. For example, if you're fallen way behind and your opponent has drawn like 4 prizes, and you've drawn only 1, and gives you 5 cards, but it only gives you like, or it only gives them like 2 cards or something, so it can be a great way to facilitate comebacks. And it's also very important, it's like a very important card in Legacy, and the whole dynamics of it is trying to reduce your chances of drawing a bad hand off of end and trying to increase theirs. So disruption is a pretty important card in the game. Rayquaza Eelektrik can often fall behind, so that's why N is an important card for it. Nonetheless, I've rarely found the need for more than 2. And sometimes your opponent has a bad hand you don't actually want to play N, so I prefer to stick with the more reliable options. Then we got Chorus, with just the same effect of shuffling your hand into your deck, but you draw a number of cards equal to the number of bench Pokemon in play. So if you both fill your bench up to 5 Pokemon, you can actually draw 10 cards with that, which is insane. So this is great for the mid game where both you and your opponent are all set up. It's kind of bad in the actual whole game, because then your opponent won't have as much bench and you might have to chorus for 1 or 2, but it's worth the risk. And then for items, I'll go over this one first. This is Random Receiver, which gets you a random supporter card from your deck basically, because you review cards until you find one. And this is nice because you can Junk Arm for Random Receiver, and if you have a bad hand but you have a Junk Arm in it, you can get Random Receiver back, assuming it's in your discard. I only play 1, so the odds of that happening are not very high, but I try to burn this card whenever I find it so that I have access to it later. And that's pretty good. It's not an actual supporter card, it just gets another one, but it is nice. And then we got a bunch of other cards, so I'll go over the Ball Trainer first because they're pretty central to the strategy. So we got 1 Jewel Ball, 3 Level Ball, and 3 Ultra Ball. So Jewel Ball is just, it's very flexible, but it's kind of luck based. You flip 2 coins, and for every hit you get to search for a basic Pokemon. And that can be any basic Pokemon, so it finds anything in the deck except for Eelektrik. So almost always something you want. But there's always that nasty 25% chance that you flip double tails and you get nothing. On the flip side, you know, you can also flip 2 heads and just find 2 Pokemon, which is insanely good. Usually you only need 1 when you play Dual Ball, so I'm fine with playing just 1 of these. It's nice to get a nice card that you can Junk Arm for to get a basic. That's the most important thing about it. And we got Level Ball. Level Ball is basically, it might as well say find a Dynamo or Eelektrik, because that's what you're doing with it most of the time. It finds any Pokemon with 90 HP or less. But you can also find some other random things like Smeargle, Mr. Mime, Victini. Very flexible card. Not great for finding attackers, because you can't fight like Rayquazas or Zekrams with it, but still too good not to play 3 of. And if you want something like Zekrom or Rayquaza, you usually want to use Ultra Ball. This card finds anything you want reliably, with the drawback that you actually cannot... You have to discard 2 cards from your hand, which can be very costly, but it can also be a benefit because you can discard like Lightning Energy, which is very nice. Alright, so for the other trainers, we got Energy Search, which is pretty much what it says on the tin. You search your deck for a basic energy, reveal it, and put it into your hand. I'm not usually a fan of playing Energy Search in many decks. It is nice that you can Junk Arm for a way to get energy. It's most important for finding Fire Energy because we don't play as many of these. We only play 4, and then 7 Lightning. But because you're playing a mix of energy, it is nice that you're able to have a card that can find these both. It's kind of like having Rainbow Energy. So that's why I played. And also just the option to Junk Arm for energy is useful sometimes. Speaking of Junk Arm, this is of course the best card in Legacy, barring like none. Sure, you have to discard 2 cards from your hand, which is costly, just like with Ultra Ball. But you get to search for a trainer card from your discard pile, and that's insanely broken. It's like super broken. So you can get back, like, if you need Level Ball, you can get 1. If you need Random Receiver, you can get 1. If you want to reuse your Scoop Up Cyclone, which you only have 1 of in your deck, you can get 1. If you need Super Rod, you can get it. If you need Tool Scrapper, anything you want really. So that's why Junk Arm is at a 4 off. And again, it's an extra way to get Lightning in the discard. So very precious. Never discard these unless you have to. Of course, Scoop Cyclone, I just kind of mentioned it. It says a spec card, you only play 1. Put 1 of your Pokemon all cards attached into your hand. I find this very useful to picking up Rayquazas after they've discarded like almost all their energies, or Raikou, and then they damage it and you're like, okay, I'll just play Scoop Up Cyclone, pick it back up, play it back down again, attach a Fire, and just attack again as if nothing happened. So it can cancel an opponent's turn. It can also be a switching card if they try to trap something active, or if you're hit by a Toxic Laser, or any kind of damaged Pokemon, or if you played something down that you actually didn't want later on, you can pick it back up. If you had a bad starter, you can pick it back up. A very, very versatile card, especially useful against decks that play Dusknoir, where they hit you for a big amount of damage, and you're like, well, damn, they're going to spread this all around my board. I don't want that next turn, so you just scoop up Cyclone and pick it back up. Very useful against Garchomp decks, for example. Well, Garchomp doesn't play Dusknoir. Empoleon decks is where it's very useful against, so really good card. I like Computer Search in this deck too, and Dowsing Machine as well. I just never really wanted to go back after starting to play Scoop Up Cyclone. It is just so strong. Super Rod, of course, is very important because there are so many different Pokemon, and some of them you want to use more than once. So, for example, against the Freezing Genesect matchup I mentioned earlier, your Victini will go down in one hit, but with Super Rod you can get it back and use it multiple times. Sometimes you have to discard Electrics when you don't want to, so you want to get those back. Sometimes they knock them out. They might knock out your Mr. Mime because they like to do a lot of bench damage, so you want to get it back. You might lose a lot of fire energy early on, you can get those back. So Super Rod is so important to actually play 2. Not many decks play 2 Super Rod, but I think this is one of the few decks where you actually want to do that. Because I almost always need one every game, and sometimes I even want multiple. Then we got Tool Scrapper, only one. This is primarily for the Landorus Mewtwo Garbodor decks. You want to get rid of Garbodor Toxin because you cannot use Dynamotor without it, and without Dynamotor your attacks are just way too costly, so you have to use Tool Scrapper to power up Rayquaza repeatedly. Only one Tool Scrapper is not very much, but you do have Junk Arms to reuse them, and against Landorus Garbodor, for example, you generally only need to kill 3 EXs to win, or sometimes they play like a non-EX, but you also have options to work around that. So the general idea is you Tool Scrapper once and then you Junk Arm for it twice, and you should usually win, and if not, you can Junk Arm for it a 3rd time or even a 4th time, but it depends on how it goes, but generally this is enough. It can be a little hard to find out sometimes. I don't have Skyline in the deck, which means you pretty much just have to draw Tool Scrapper at one point, but you don't want to waste it. So it can be a bit hard to find, but I think I usually win against Landorus Garbodor, so I don't mind. And it's also useful to get rid of like Float Stones and other random tools that they play. And we got Tropical Beach, the last and the most expensive inclusion in the deck. I played 2 of these. A lot of Rayquaza's deck play a different stadium, but I like Tropical Beach because it's a consistency card. My supporter count is pretty low, I will admit, but Tropical Beach helps a lot. Usually you cannot attack on turn 1 or turn 2, and that's fine. But to not waste your turn, you can, instead of attacking, you can just draw until you have 7. So it's almost like playing 2 supporters sometimes, which is really good. It also functions as a way to counter Burbank City Gym and other random stadiums that you don't want in play. So very versatile card, but a lot of people play Skyro Bridge instead, which also has its merits. It lets you free retreat between a lot of your Pokemon. Some of these have like 2 retreat, others have 1 retreat. But for example, Raikou has 1 retreat, Rayquaza EX has 1 retreat, Mr. Mime has 1 retreat, Smeargle has 1 retreat, so Skyro Bridge does synergize very nicely with the deck. It gives Kelly a 1 retreat, which means it's much easier to just switch around. But I find it really annoying to include Skyro Bridge in this deck because I already find consistency is a bit of an issue sometimes. So I'd rather use my slots on something that actually boosts my consistency and acts as a counter stadium. But I understand Skyro Bridge. It's also pretty hard to get Tropical Beach because it's such a hard to find promo card. It was only given out at the World Championships for like 2 years, so these are very hard to find. So I don't blame you if you're playing Skyro Bridge instead. The only card I haven't really mentioned yet is Floatstone. You just attach it to a Pokemon that's free retreat, pretty simple. As I said, this deck has plenty of Pokemon with too much retreat cost, such as Eelektrik, such as Rayquaza, the normal version, such as Zekrom. It's also very nice to attach to Smeargle, because you can send it up after a KO, then retreat it for free after using Portrait, without having to waste energy. This deck has a lot of switching to do, and Floatstone is perfect for facilitating that. Between Floatstone and Scoop Up Cyclone, we have 4 switching cards, and that should be enough most of the time. So yeah, that's the deck in a nutshell. Now let's go watch a game with it. Alright, so I've got a game for you here against 4 I'm playing. A little bit of background. I've played against this guy on the ladder plenty of times. He's always playing the same deck. Lugia Legends, Ho-Oh EX, Shaman with Celebration Win. So the way his deck works is, I'll try to show the scans in post-production, I guess. So Lugia Legend is a card that actually consists of 2 cards, the top half and the bottom half. And if you have both halves, then you can bench it, otherwise you cannot play it. And then when you play it to the bench, you can use its power Ocean Grow to look at the top 5 cards of your deck, and if there's any energy in there, you can attach those to Lugia Legend right away, and everything else in there has to be discarded. So it's kind of like Celestial Roar. Funny coincidence. And then it has an attack called Elemental Blast, which for 3 different energies, a fire, a lightning, and a water, you do 200, which is massive, but then you have to discard 1 of each, so it's very hard to keep going. But then you play Ho-Oh EX, which can revive itself from the discard pile, along with up to 3 energy cards, so with its rebirth power. and then you can use Shaman with Celebration Wind to move those energies over to Lugia Legend, and that way you try to stream Elemental Blasts as many times as you can. He also plays a couple of alternative attackers such as Darkrai and Keldeo, but that's the main focus of its deck. So we're gonna see. I think this matchup is generally favored for me. I generally win when I'm using Rayquaza, and I've played this deck a lot. But I thought it would be a good game to, you know, show the different attackers in the deck. I can't show all at once because none of them are useful in every matchup. But this was just generally a pretty fun game to play. Figure, since my opponent is called for fun playing. I've got other games too, but I can't really do that too many. I'm gonna pause the video whenever I have a long-winded explanation or something. So right away, you can see in my opening hand that I started with this red Rayquaza and the Zekrom going second. I put the Zekrom on the bench because it wanted KOs Lugia Legends, and it's a non-EX, so it's a pretty good attacker to save. So if he knocks out my active, I want the Zekrom to be safe, and this way, if he doesn't knock out my active, I have an easier time Dynamotoring to Zekrom, because you cannot Dynamotor to your active, but you can Dynamotor to your bench. So that lets me power it up more quickly. He starts with Shaman, which is unfortunate, because that means that's one less use of Celebration Wind that he has. He gets a turn 1 Getsis, gets rid of my Super Rod, which is not a card I wanted to play anyway, so pretty unlucky that he got a poor Getsis there. Usually you want to get a little bit more, you're going to get rid of level balls. He gets a communication, and right away he grabs the Lugia Legend bottom half, so that tells me it's the top half in his hand, so he's going to get to play that down right away. He's going to use Ocean Grow, and it's going to be a bit risky, not going to lie. But he actually gets 3 energy, 3 different ones too, so with the grass on the Shaman, he's actually ready to attack next turn, which is super scary. Usually you get like 1 or 2 energy, but 3, damn. So I attach to the Zekrom, I get a Rayquaza EX. I know he plays a lot of other attackers, a couple of EXs, I want to have a Rayquaza ready for those. Get a pretty good hand off the Oak New Theory. I get the ways to get 2 Dynamos. So if I get really lucky next turn, I can actually Bolt Strike on turn 2 if I find a way to discard 2 Lightnings and fight 2 Electrics. Not too likely, but it can happen. He has the tough choice of whether he wants to attack my Rayquaza this turn, since it's not a very useful Pokemon. It only gives him 1 prize for an Elemental Blast. Generally you want to save Elemental Blast for EXs. But I think he figures out if he just doesn't attack, then I'm going to win anyway, so I don't think he really has a choice here. Uses Collector to grab Rufflets, which is a funny thing that like searches quote-unquote flying Pokemon. It searches Pokemon that resist fighting, which includes the both half of Lugia Legends as well as Shaman. So he's actually going to go into Rufflet, and I think he's going to search some more Lugias here. And he also grabbed Darkrai and Keldeo. Pretty cool combo. If you get a Rainbow Energy on something, they have free retreat thanks to Darkrai. And Keldeo, of course, if you attach a Rainbow to it, it can also help you retreat for free, kind of like a rush in a retreat. Kind of like in my deck, but instead of Floatstone, you use Dark Cloak. So I get a Beach, which means if I don't get to attack, at least I get to draw cards. I get 1 Electric out. I get a Raikou, not the greatest thing, and just a bunch of supporters, the things I don't really want. I think I'm contemplating whether to attach Floatstone or not. I could put in my active, but then if it gets knocked out, I don't have a free retreater to accelerate my my Zekrom, because I would have to send something else up, right? And yeah, here's the second Lugia Legend. Let's see what he gets this time. He gets 2 energy, so he now has a massive 6 energy in play. And one thing I would be really scared of is if he played Pokemon Catcher or Reversal to grab my Rayquaza EX and kill it, but instead he just attaches to the Keldeo and beaches up. So we're both getting pretty set up, but we don't really want to attack first. I personally don't play Pokemon Catcher or Reversal. I think he does. So I think what I'm going for here, I'm not sure actually. I could try to go for a KO with Raikou or something else, but like KOing Rufflet with one of my precious attackers doesn't really sound like something I want to do. But I'm actually gonna Juniper and get rid of everything here. Oh right, this works, yeah. So I think this is actually a Pokemon I was going for, Victini. So Victini can kill Rufflet but pretty much nothing else. So by using Victini with V-Create here, I can attack this thing without risking one of my good attackers. So it's actually pretty nice. I could, like, if I didn't get Victini, I could have gotten some other disposable Pokemon, like maybe an extra Dynamo or something, send that up, and then power up the Shred Rayquaza, and that could also kill Rufflet next turn. So no biggie if I didn't get this, but I'm very fortunate to get the Victini here. So I actually get to power it up, and because my bench is full now, I can attack with V-Create, do 100, kill the Rufflets, and from there, He no longer has anything he really wants to send up. He could like stall for more time with Shaman, but he doesn't really want to fall behind prizes that much, so I think he's just forced to take the KO here. The question is with what? Does he want to use Keldeo and use Secret Sword? It's not powered up yet, but he has access to Shaman. He could either play a second Shaman or use something like a Super Scoop Up or Scoop Up Cyclone to reuse the Shaman he already has. So he's got a Twins. I forgot he played that card. If you're behind in prizes, you can play this and search for any 2 cards you want from your deck. So if there is a way he has to attack, like a Double Colorless Energy or Scoop Up Cyclone or a Super Scoop Up, all of those would work to get something else ready. Or he could just Elemental Blast. I don't think he wants to. You could also Twins for something risky like Pokemon Reversal or Pokemon Catcher. And if he flips heads, he could go for my Rayquaza EX and take 2 prizes that way. That would be fairly good, but then I would still have to sack him to retaliate. Looks like he has a Rescue Scarf, which means if I knock him out in 1 hit, then his Lugia will come back to his hand and he can just use Ocean Grow again, which is great for him. It looks like he's using a second Shaman to move energy to his Keldeo, at least 1. Which I think is a decent play, because it KOs Victini, but it doesn't discard a bunch of energy. At the same time, I can KO it back with Rayquaza EX if I get a Lightning Energy, and I can Dynamo it twice. He plays down the Sky Arrow, no problem with that. I don't have anything with 1 Retreat that I want to send up, because I want the Rayquaza EX to send on the bench, but I have the Floatstone Shred Rayquaza. He does use Elemental Blast though, so it looks like I can just use Zekrom here. Now, what I would really like this turn is a Tool Scrapper. I think I might look for it here. Nope, not even checking if it's prized or not. Just straight up grabbing a 3rd Dynamo because I know I want to power up Rayquaza at some point. And for Rayquaza to kill EX's turn after turn, he does need 3 Dynamos per turn. So Junk Arm for an Energy Search to ensure myself the knockout with my Zekrom. Because I think I only have 1 Lightning in the discard at this point, so I just want to make sure I get this knockout. Colress for a massive 10, and no Tool Scrapper, so he will get his Lugia Legend back. I will be able to Ultra Ball some Lightning away if I want to Dynamo them more often. Because as you can see, I only have 1 Lightning here, and I have plenty of disposable other cards that I could get rid of, like the Victini EX. So I don't think this is going to cost me anything. Looks like I'm going to get rid of both Lightnings. That's fine. Just grabbing the Eel in advance, I guess. Because I can play it down next turn. If I'm going to play an Ultra Ball anyway, might as well. So now my Rayquaza has an energy. The EX Rayquaza. And that means I will probably be able to KO any EX he sends up next turn. And I'm also KOing this Lugia Legend. So either he has to dedicate his other Lugia Legend to KO this Zekrom, which would be painful. Or he has to use an EX or some other kind of attacker. I think he also plays the Shred Rayquaza. So if he really has the means to, he could Shaman to Rayquaza with Shred, but that would require him to pick up one of his Shamans. Looks like he's rebirthing with Ho-Oh and getting some more energy into play, and there is the reversal. So I wonder what he's going for here. He flips heads. Oh, he's going for an Eelektrik. Okay, so I guess he's going to, yeah, he's going to Rainbow Burn it. Ho-Oh with, for every different color energy, it does 20 extra damage on top of the 20 base damage. So Rainbow Burn with 4 different energy does 20 plus 4 times 20 is 100. So that knocks out an Eelektrik. But thankfully I did accelerate my Rayquaza EX in advance, so that means that just 2 Dynamotors will get me to the place I need to be with Dragon Burst. And I do only have 1 Dynamotor available because most of my energy is still stuck on my Zekrom. So I will need to find a way to either... yeah, I need to find an extra Lightning to accelerate to this thing. Either by discarding it or just straight up attaching it. Dynamotoring in advance before you know what you're doing is probably not a good play. I could thin out a Smeargle, grab it with Ultra Ball, and then use Juniper to discard it, but I decided the Smeargle might be useful later. Attach all my Float Stones, keep the Skyro Bridge in play because it might be useful for free treat. I don't expect to need to beach. And if I scoop up Cyclone and just a plain old Lightning, so lots of means to get that extra Lightning on my Rayquaza. Now I get an EX knockout, so I'm going down to 2 prizes to my opponent's 4, which means I am well in the lead. And the only thing he has that can knock this out is Lugia Legends or the Shred Rayquaza, if he has it still. I know I've seen it in his deck before, so I think he plays it. But it's going to be tough because he's already got both of his Shamans. Again, pretty big shame that he started with the Shaman. So you can see he finds a Pokemon Collector with Random Receiver. Not something he really wants, unless he has like a third Shaman that he wants to use. And yeah, it doesn't look like he's gonna use Shred Rayquaza at all, unless it's in his hand already. Looks like another Lugia Legend is coming down. So if he gets a good Ocean Grow here, but he's used a lot of energy already, so wow, he still gets 2 energy. Sick. Okay, so it's still a game then. He can also go down to 2 prizes, kill my Rayquaza EX. Plays a laser, which seems fairly inconsequential. He needs another energy for his Lugia Legend. Something that gives lightning energy. It looks like he doesn't have it, because he's sending up Darkrai. And he's attaching to his other Lugia Legends. Yeah, that's kind of strange. So yeah, normally this would be bad for me because I can't use this Rayquaza the same turn. Because I gotta retreat it, but I got Scoop Up Cyclone in my hand, so I can pick up the Rayquaza. Here you can see Scoop Up Cyclone is really useful as a switching card. Pick it up, play it back down with the Fire Energy, and then just reattach the Lightning Energies that I discarded last turn with Dynamotor. And yeah, you might have thought that you could buy a turn this way by sending up Darkrai to wall the Zekrom that I have on my bench, because that seems like the only thing I can really attack with. But yeah, that's the game wrapped up. Didn't take as much analysis as I thought, so not a whole lot of pausing, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. I thought this was a pretty fun game to play and watch, so hopefully you get a good idea of how the Radial deck works and what kind of decision making goes into it. Let me know what you thought of this video. Let me know if you want to see more PTCGO content, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.